Welcome to Part 3 of the Lee-Peacock Feud, Never Surrender, produced by North Texas Revealed. Just a few weeks after Elijah Clark had been killed in 1868, it is now early March, and Irish Jack has assigned Billy and Charlie Dixon with the task of delivering cotton to Jefferson and to return with a load of household goods and supplies. The young men set out on the Jefferson Road with cotton following the regular route. It was unusually hot that day. The first 20 miles had resulted in a setback as one of the wagon wheels had broken. Charlie held the reins to the mule team while Billy worked on repairing the wheel. Charlie heard thundering hooves approaching suddenly, and a party of 12 or more men had overtaken them in their predicament. It was Union League men. Charlie tried to warn Billy, but there was no time. Several dismounted and grabbed Charlie. The others, still mounted, surrounded Billy near the back of the wagon.
You fellers must be lost or just plain stupid to be out here on the Jefferson Road in the middle of the day.
Billy just held up his hands and gasped. Another said,
"Yep, it's dangerous business for Lee men to be out on a public road. Didn't you know that?"
Don't you worry now, we will give you a quick court-martial.
And with that, two of the men who had dismounted near Billy grabbed him up and shoved him forward down the road, one of them commanding Billy to take 10 paces and then stop. At 7 paces, rifle shots echoed through the valley. For these men, anyone who was in cahoots with Bob Lee deserved the death sentence. One of them said to Charlie,
Somebody's rifle must have slipped. Better get him home to Jack.
Now that the deed was done, they left Charlie behind to tell the tale. But in his grief and shock, he just sat there with Billy not knowing what to do. A stranger came along, an older gentleman, that offered to help Charlie get back home. They put Billy's body in the wagon, finished fixing the wheels, and headed back up Jefferson Road towards the Pilot Grove to Dixon Mound. Of course, Jack was just overcome with grief, as was his whole family. Bob Lee was just hotter than a nickel-plated branding iron when he heard the news. Feeling somewhat responsible for the incident because of Jack's clan support of him and how that had resulted in the death of his young son Billy, Lee set out to make things right the best way he could. They would become better organized and secretive in the way in which they conducted their business. After Billy was laid to rest at the Sears Chapel Cemetery and the grief had subsided a bit, the anger and resentment they had all been feeling began to broil. The air was thick with turmoil and plans were set in place to take revenge when the time was right. The Peacock men had set up a meeting in mid-June to be held near the NANCE farm just southwest of Trenton between Dog Creek and Indian Creek. The meeting took place late at night at a big horse lot on the NANCE farm. That evening, according to Mary Ann Gentry, Dow and a neighbor were out catching horses in the lot when they noticed someone stealing a saddle, this being about the same time as the members of the Peacock party were showing up to the scheduled secret meeting. Dow alerted others to the theft and a posse was quickly mounted in pursuit of the thief. What the Peacock men didn't know was this was just a ruse designed to draw them out into the trails of the thickets nearby. As they rode in pursuit in the moonlit night, gunfire erupted and a pitched battle ensued. When all was quiet, her husband Dal Nance and John Baldock were dead, and several others wounded, including Dan Sanders. He would later die from his wound. Even Lewis Peacock suffered from the wounds received that night. Lee had told his men the night before to leave Peacock to him, that he wanted that target for himself. Peacock almost lost his life that very night. It is said that Peacock's horse swerved just in the nick of time. Dal Nance and John Baldock were hastily buried in one grave at the Mount Carmel Cemetery just west of Desert Creek. Poor Mary Ann Nance was now a widow with a 2.5-month-old son to raise by herself. She would return to her father's place, Martin Gentry, where they would remain for the next 8 years. In 1876, she married John Neely and lived to be 73 years old, outliving 2 husbands. John M. Baldock also left behind a widow, Mary C. Nance. After the Nance fray, Peacock sought out the assistance of the 5th Military District, contacting General Reynolds himself in Austin, while Bob Lee crafted an editorial and sent it into the Texas State News in Bonham. A famous letter dated June 26, 1868, which described for the readers the cause of the troubles in the Four Corners region. The letter to the editor bolstered Lee's support in the area. while Peacock's letter requesting a military solution drew attention to the problems faced by the Unionists and freedmen. Once Peacock realized how much Lee's letter had bolstered his support, he contacted General Reynolds again, urging him to intervene. Reynolds issued a proclamation offering a $1,000 reward for anyone who would deliver Bob Lee, the post commander at Marshall or Austin. By September 12, 1868, Reynolds dispatched his Staff Lieutenant Vernon to tour through the Corners region to make an assessment as to whether military intervention was needed, or if the civil authorities could handle the matter. Appointed Judge Hardin Hart of the 7th Judicial District issued a warning to the press that he had set up shop in Pilot Grove, that all offenders there would be tried before the court, and requested on October 17th permission to hold extra sessions of the district court in Grayson, Fannin, and Hunt counties. When Reynolds received the report on conditions in the Corners from Lieutenant Charles A. Vernon, he issued orders for Lieutenant Sands to dispatch a detachment to the region to find Bob Lee and end the lawlessness. By December, the press had reported one U.S. soldier had been killed near Farmersville, while in a posse led by Lee-Peacock in pursuit of Bob Lee. By January of 1869, the military had increased its numbers drastically in northeast Texas, and several area desperados met their end during the early part of the year. On March 28, 1869, Dal Witt met his end a few miles north of McKinney. They almost got Penn and Hayes, but they both escaped. A week later, Ben Bickerstaff met his end in Alvarado on April 5, 1869, and it was only another 3 weeks before they had Penn and Hayes in their sights again. On April 20th, the posse rode fast to the northeast corner of Fannin County to a home near Bodart Creek. Penn came out shooting while Hayes tried to run. Penn was shot down, but as he lay there bleeding out, several men of the posse moved in closer to see if he was in fact dead. Bill Everhart gasped as Penn raised his gun and fired one last shot, a bullet grazing Everhart's ear. Responsive shots by the posse finished off the desperado known as William Bill Penn. Hayes had slipped away during the assault on Penn. 3 men from Kansas arrived at Pilot Grove to get information about the whereabouts of Bob Lee and his gang. Lee-Peacock and others met with the 3 bounty hunters, giving them what intelligence they had on Lee. The spies for the Lee faction overheard the conversation and dashed back to Wildcat Thicket to pass along the news of the bounty hunters' arrival. That night, Lee men secured the roads leading into Lee Station from Pilot Grove, and by morning, gunshots were heard at break of day. The schoolteacher, Dorinda Pierce, the sister of deceased Dr. William Pierce, was staying as a boarder with Melinda Lee at Lee Station. Both women heard the shots and went outside to see if it was Bob or any of his followers. As it turned out, all 3 men were strangers. Dorinda and Melinda knew something needed to be done about 3 dead men, but hadn't seen any of Lee's men come by the house. It was apparent they would have to be the ones to dig the grave for these 3 redlegs from Kansas. So the 2 women dragged the men to a spot on the road and began to dig a shallow grave in the ditch. With a shovel and hoe, the women dug down about 3 feet deep and rolled the men over into it, quickly covering all 3 as fast as they could and covering the grave with branches and leaves. While they were somewhat relieved the task was done, that they hadn't been discovered doing it, both wondered just how many more men would come in search of claiming the bounty on Lee and his men. When Peacock and his associates received word of the Redlegs' misfortune, Lewis sent yet another request for General Reynolds for more troops. Captain Charles Campbell and a detachment of the 6th U.S. Infantry were ordered into the trouble zone. When they arrived, their presence created even more anxiety for the citizens of the Corners area, even more appealing now to the Army and the Unionist population. Until now, the loyalty of Lee's men had been unquestioned, but as pressure mounted in the area, some began to falter. It was his friend, Henry Bourne, who lived only a few miles to the south, that would ultimately try to cash in on the reward. On May 24, 1869, Bob had risen early at his home to have breakfast with the family and announced to Melinda that he would be traveling south about 3 miles to a friend's home. He wore his best clothes that morning and was loaded for bear. He mounted his horse, bid Melinda a fond goodbye, and while singing a tune, leisurely trotted his way towards the road. Within a half-mile from the front door, and not even to the road yet, Lee was ambushed by Captain Campbell's 6th Infantry, led there by Henry Bourne and a few other citizens. Around 15 shots were fired, and Lee slid from the saddle without a word. His horse scattered once Lee had fallen and galloped back towards Lee Station, carrying the empty saddle and its news home to Melinda and the family. Melinda had heard the shots, and a sense of dread fell upon her. "I fear they've got Bob," she said, as she went out to see his horse coming up fast from the trail near the thicket, his shotgun swinging from the saddle horn. His brother-in-law, Parson Smith, collected the body, made a coffin, and swiftly buried the adorned Southern leader not far from where he had fallen. Thanks for watching, and remember to like and subscribe.